Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Bahriye, and I am the Interim Academic Director and Clinical Associate Professor for the Integrated Marketing and Communications Department in the Division of Programs in Business here at NYU School of Professional Studies. I am so excited to welcome you all to this event, which is part of the Leading Global Growth series that is led by one of our highly esteemed faculty members, Professor Benaroya. And today we are very honored to welcome Mike Gladstone from Pfizer, former Global President, Inflammation and Immunology. Welcome, everyone. Before I hand it over to Professor Benaroya, I wanted to give a quick introduction on us for those of you that are joining us from outside of NYU. The Integrated Marketing and Communications Department, we are so proud to say that we are a diverse and global community of students, scholars, professionals, and educators. We strongly believe that brands and professionals in marketing and PR have a key role to play in driving business growth, and we have a responsibility in positively influencing societies and economies in a sustainable and equitable way. Our practice of marketing and PR is both human-centered and data-driven. We are also a large group. We are technically the largest, or not even technically, we are the largest in the country that is specifically focused on marketing and PR in terms of giving graduate degrees. And we are around 1,200 students in the program across the cohorts, with more than 200 faculty members that are practitioners and leaders in the industry. With that said, I will hand it over to Professor Benaroya. Thank you again for joining us today.
Okay, brilliant. I've been doing this for over 2 years now. And this is the first time ever that we do it without a mask. And it's a pure coincidence with Pfizer. For those of you who are joining remotely, welcome. I'm George Benaroya. During the day, I work as a CFO. I started my career at Procter & Gamble, then Tetra Pak, media, and now I work in private equity. Now, once per week, I get to do something I love, and this to teach this class. Now, we are not actors. These are real students. You've joined a real class going on now live at NYU's School of Professional Studies. And I'll show you and explain what's going on. Phil, will you show the slides? So what students do the first session is they pick a company, any company they want, and they pick Pfizer. And then each week, they learn about finance, by learning one thing or making one business decision. So this is the first session that they took together. Now, the first assignment that they have is about headcount. How would you persuade your boss at Gladstone to let you hire more marketing people? This is how Anisha did it. What would you do if you don't have enough product to sell? That's the situation that we have still with supply chain. Would you prioritize old clients or new clients? It's interesting that before the pandemic, on the left-hand side, students were picking new clients to make more money. But during the pandemic, on the right-hand side, no one did. Now, for Pfizer, was real tricky. And this is what Heshan did. And then we'll have one of the students asking Mr. Gladstone, what would he do in a situation like this? What would you do about inflation? How much would you increase prices? This is what Manky did. She increased prices by 5%. Now, there are no right or wrong numbers in the class. The idea is to learn how to use numbers in a meaningful way to persuade others. Oh, she's not in my class. What would you do if someone reacts like her when you increase prices? So what students did is they came up with a number of strategies, the 4 of them, to present or to explain to consumers why we were increasing prices. And then the last step is we invite global executives who make all these decisions in real life on a daily basis to show us how they do it. And today with us is Mike Gladstone, the Global President at Pfizer. He's also the US President-elect of the Leadership Council and a member of the Executive Committee representing pharmaceutical manufacturers, the pharma industry in general. Now, I like to make introductions a bit more personal until if you want to stop the slideshow. And look, what I try to do is I try to find speakers who will genuinely motivate others. And that's when I thought about Mr. Gladstone. Just last night, he was so kind to send me a message and tell me, listen, don't worry about the weather. I'll make it tomorrow. Wouldn't you like to have a boss like that? Yeah. This is what one of his colleagues said about him. More than a mentor, Gladstone is a sponsor who speaks your name in a room full of opportunities. He sees the best in people and is extremely generous with his time, devoting hours and hours to coaching people and instilling in them the confidence they need to succeed. These people end up doing great things and becoming leaders themselves because Gladstone believed in them and saw their potential. Please join me to welcome Mike Gladstone.
That was from my mom, by the way.
Without it. So what we do in these sessions is students will ask all the questions themselves. I will just ask the first one to sort of break the ice. And Phil, maybe you could put that slide. So Pfizer is the largest pharmaceutical company in the world. And what we would like to know is, if you're a global president, what do you do? And also, what was it like during the pandemic to work at Pfizer?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I will hopefully try to do a better job answering it than I did with my daughter. So when we were working at home during the pandemic, she got to see me work because I was out of the house. She's like, you got to tell me what you do because, by the way, she's listening today. She just held in, so I wasn't nervous until that point. No. But she said, you know, you're basically talking on the phone all day and having a good time. You know, what exactly do you do? So I'm going to try to do a better job now than I did back then. So first of all, it's a real privilege. I've had two of these jobs, global president jobs when I was with Pfizer, and one was internal medicine, one was inflammation and immunology. And it's a real privilege to work with colleagues around the world who are purpose-driven, highly motivated, excellent colleagues. And our mission was to end the suffering for patients who have debilitating or disfiguring conditions. And that was really our North Star. Specifically, my last role in inflammation, I had a group of colleagues, a couple thousand colleagues who were deeply focused on debilitating diseases like some in gastroenterology, some in dermatology, and some in rheumatoid arthritis. So I was responsible for 58 countries. And so, you know, the question is, what do you do when you take over a group like that? What's job one? Job one is understanding the vision and the purpose. Where are we going and what's our reason for being here? And so to do that, we've got a head of research that I would work with, the head of clinical trials. All of our marketing colleagues get together, and together we would jointly come up with the strategy and reinforcing our purpose. And then it's at that point when you start to roll that out to the rest of the organization and create that vision. Now, during the time after you do that, one of the things you do is you want to create an environment, probably the second most important thing that I did, an environment where everybody can excel. It's easier said than done. That's about culture. Spend a tremendous time on that and having people feel empowered. And during the course of that, the group of physicians would present a plan, and the marketers would present a plan. And I would look at that plan. We would engage with the leadership team, challenge it many ways, revise to come up with the best plan possible. And then, you know, that's where we would focus our time and ultimately try to knock down the barriers that are in their way. So during these discussions, you run into internal barriers or external barriers. I try to wipe those away. That's my main job. I'll tell you an example that probably illustrates it the best. This was a while ago. It was a leadership course. I was with a company that was ultimately bought by Pfizer, so it was a Pfizer company. And they took about 50 of us and got us up at 4 a.m. It was a leadership development class. Drove us to Trenton, New Jersey, to a place in the middle of the night. It was pouring down rain where nothing was. They dropped us off and we're in raincoats. And they told us, here's the deal. At 4 o'clock today, kids are going to come around this corner, and this barren piece of dirt you see right now, you're going to have turned into a kid's park for them. The children in this neighborhood do not have a park. They have nowhere to play. This was filled with all sorts of bad things very recently. And so we got off the bus and it's pouring down rain, and you see huge piles of mulch, huge pieces of gravel, loads of playground equipment. and a paint by numbers sort of design on the wall on one of the buildings, really tall buildings, pouring down rain, and we got to work. So everybody just started doing everything. There was a plan. You had people carrying wheelbarrows in the rain, falling down, eating a sandwich. They were so focused to get this thing done by 4 because we knew those kids were going to walk around the corner. And the funny thing was, it was pouring all day again. There was a blocker over the wall so you could actually go paint when you were tired. And during the course, anybody ever done paint by numbers? You fill in a little bit of color and then slowly the picture comes to life. Well, during the course of the day, you would see that this picture on the wall, they were children playing in the park that you were making. And we came to learn these were the exact children that were going to come around the corner. So you were motivated during the day. You saw the kids and families that were going to benefit. Lo and behold, 40 minutes before we were done, the sun came out and everything stopped. The kids came around the corner and the parents came around with them. They had never seen a park in their town and they broke down in tears. The parents were beside, it's a moment I'll never forget in my life. The parents were just in tears and the kids were so happy running around to the park. It was an amazing moment. So then they gathered us together and they said, okay, let's talk about what this exercise meant to you. We're kind of like, wow, we were so exhausted. We were brain dead. And they're like, who emerged as the leader? I want to talk to who's the leader. We'll kind of look around and we're like, I don't know. There really wasn't a leader, right? And they're like, well, how did you get the work done? It's like, we just figured it out and did it. We knew those kids were going to come around the corner and we knew we had to get this done. And, it starts to realize what they're saying. And the take home message was, if you align a group of people around a mission and a vision, they absolutely see it clearly. And if they're driven by a purpose, our mission was to get the park done. Our purpose was to serve those children, the kids and their families. And we were working like crazy for it. When you have those two things, you don't need a manager to supervise. So it reminded me and all my colleagues, I'll never forget this lesson. Your job as a senior leader is to really paint that vision and picture and have that purpose and then get out of the way for your people to execute. And if you do that, they'll do absolutely amazing things.
That's a beautiful story. Thanks. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mike, for giving us this opportunity, Mr. Gladstone. My name is Ye, and my question for you, in particular, is in pharmaceutical industry like Pfizer. What are important factors when you, going to develop your business in other countries, and what kind of relationship you're dealing with, local public health departments or governments in growing business in international market? And do you have any, good stories to share with us, like Viagra or Enbrel or other products?
Thanks for the question. Yeah, when you're dealing with international or bodies overseas that oversee, different countries, that the bodies that oversee the medicines and the supply and the approval, the number one thing you need to think about is collaboration with these government entities and these, we call them the authority for the most part. And it's absolutely critical that you engage with them early before the medicine is actually a medicine, because you have to explain to them what is the disease that you're trying to treat. And then you need to explain to them, because this isn't work they do all the time, they're very busy people, say, okay, this disease causes this problem for a patient. So you paint out clearly what the patient is suffering with and how it changes their life and what it means to them, to their families, to their work life, to their home life, and their productivity to society, right? So you explain that. Then finally, you say people living with these diseases cost society so much money, making estimates. You say, because there are no effective treatments for this disease, this is costing society $590 million, or pick the number when you do the math. And that's extremely important that they understand, sort of what that is. And then you can sort of discuss, well, what value does this medicine bring? If you were to approve and pay for this medicine, those costs could go down significantly. Therefore, the patient wins. Society wins. They pay less overall for the cost of healthcare, and also it's good for Pfizer too. So that's at the crux of those discussions, and they're really important that you do them early. But also having relationships with these governments is absolutely critical, because you've got to understand what their needs are. So you create a clinical trial that gives you data that allows that government to say it's worth it and we'll pay for it. And I'll give you just an example in Sweden. It's a different example. It's not about a product, but it's about the industry. They had done the math in Sweden and anticipated that their pharmaceutical costs were going to go through the roof. increasing 14, 15, 16 every year, up, 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 up. And the fact of the matter is that that wasn't the case. So we got together as an industry, we had an industry association, and got together with the government, and there was trust developed over years. And we started to share with them all of our data, and they were missing something. They were missing prices go up, sales go up for a drug, then they go generic and they go down to nothing. And another drug, they go up, then they go generic, and then it disappears. Well, they had missed some of those. So they had overestimated the increase. So through collaborating with this country in this case, they realized that there was an error. And we adjusted and said, look, it looks like pharmaceuticals are only going to grow by 4%, and we'll guarantee it as an industry. So that was a win. The person in charge of managing that country's pharmaceutical budget had a huge win. They thought it was going to be here. Industry guaranteed them here. It was a win for us because we didn't have to endure an arbitrary price increase. And it was a win for patients because they were able to get the medicine that they wanted. So it's another example how in whatever country you're in, you've really got to engage with the authorities in an entirely different way than I ever would have imagined when I was a US marketing colleague. I never would have anticipated that, but it's super important. That answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Gladstone. Nice to see you. Thank you for giving us this opportunity. Yeah, I'm Jin Shen. And my question is what makes Pfizer different from other pharmaceutical companies?
I think the people and the culture, I think, are differentiators. I can tell you this, during the course of my career, I've had the opportunity to partner with over 30 companies. So when you partner with a company, sometimes you put marketing resources together and sell the brand together. Sometimes you buy companies, all those sorts of things. And there are a few differentiating factors with Pfizer. And I think the biggest thing you see with Pfizer is we absolutely just go for it. We empower people. I will not name the company because I don't want to. One of these companies, we were struggling because we were going for it and they were a bit more conservative. And they said, in our company, we don't get into trouble for missing opportunities. What we get in trouble for is making a wrong call, going for something and failing. And then it was like a light bulb went off. We're like, aha, that's the problem. We are the exact opposite. At Pfizer, you can get into, I use trouble loosely, you can get into trouble for not going for it and missing opportunities. You're not going to get in trouble for trying something that didn't work. Those are two fundamentally different cultures. I can tell you which one I want to work for. I want to be with the company that goes for it. And during my time at Pfizer, that's absolutely the case, and it's still the case. So no, thanks for the question.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much. And then she's online, so.
My name is Ruiqi Li. Thank you for giving us this opportunity, Mr. Gladstone. The question is, how does Pfizer do market research, that is, identify the needs of patients?
Thanks for the question. So Pfizer does market research a number of ways. First of all, there are patient advocacy groups that we work with. So if you are looking into a medicine that's going to help with a disease, you can find a patient advocacy group, a group that advocates for those patients. We connect with them and we begin to learn, what is the patient journey like? How does that patient suffer? What does it mean to their quality of life? How do they do the things they want to do? Are they in pain? We learn all of that from them. And Pfizer, when I left, it worked with well over 100 patient advocacy groups. On top of that, we'll do research with healthcare providers and ask them questions. When you say it's fibromyalgia disease, how do you know when someone has fibromyalgia? How do they feel? How do you treat them? What is that treatment course like? What medicines do you typically give them? How do they react? So we learn from the patient groups, the healthcare providers. We learn a lot of information that way. Then we also learn from patients. We'll do research and ask patients, because understanding the patient is absolutely front and center at all times. It's the only way you can market, develop, or create a medicine is understanding that journey. So imagine you're a patient with chronic pain. We brought these patients in. They've participated in other focus groups and they sit in chairs like you are now. Are those really comfortable chairs? Maybe for an hour, but not for a whole day. So we brought them in and we took a different approach. They had beds for those who needed to lay down. We had big, comfortable chairs where the feet went up for some people who were in pain. We had massage therapists who could help if somebody was having a cramp. And so they stayed all day, and the insights we got from them about their journey were through the roof. And they were so thankful. They said, "You really understand us." And as a result, they told us so much more about their journey. And that's how we do the research. And that's what ultimately gives us the information and data we need to do clinical trials that give the data that help those patients. And for instance, what we learned from patients in pain is, has anybody ever been to the doctor and they talk about a pain score on a scale of 1 to 10? You're in a lot of pain or a little pain. I did a talk on this once, but that doesn't mean a whole lot. When we talk to these patients, they're like, "I don't care if I'm from a 9 to a 7. I want to go up the stairs and put a shirt on, or I want to hold my child, or I want to hug my mom, or I want to carry something." So what we learned from them is to talk about function. And we want to talk to physicians about helping their patients get back to functioning and doing the things that they love to do. So all this comes in. Does that answer a question? I think so.
You're really helping them out because your strategic plan is about how to grow sales, right, over the next 10 years. And so, yeah, we have one more on this, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for giving us this opportunity. My name is Zola.
Thank you.
And my question is that we know how to estimate future growth for products like Enbrel for Pfizer's consumer division. And what we want to learn is that how does the pharma industry, including Pfizer, makes growth estimates for prescription drugs?
Absolutely, thank you. We in the pharmaceutical prescription side like to think Advil forecasting is a lot easier. So it's a great question. So when you think about how do you forecast growth, and I'll start with a brand new molecule that's going to treat a disease where there really are no good treatment options. You find out how many patients have that disease worldwide, and we'll use the US as an example. So you find out, okay, based on estimates, the CDC says that we may have 500,000 people in the US with this disease. So, okay, how many of those patients are diagnosed? 2%. Okay, so there's a big opportunity to increase diagnosis. The reasons oftentimes patients aren't diagnosed is because there's no treatment. What's the point? If you have a treatment, that's when physicians and healthcare providers really start to diagnose. So you've got 500,000, you're like, what percent is treated? 2%, I forget what I said before. Okay, if you were to get patients treated, what percentage of those patients would be appropriate for your drug? In this hypothetical case, it's for mild to moderate eczema or something. So then the patient funnel gets a little smaller, right? And then how many of those patients would be on competitive therapies? Because we believe we know what competitors will come out in 2 or 3 years when this drug is approved. So you start with the patient funnel, you look at the diagnosis, which brings it down smaller. What's the competitive set? What are the appropriate patients? And then you're left with a number of patients, which you can forecast from there. Where the growth comes from and where the art and science come together is when you're going to say, okay, when there are treated diseases, most of the time that diagnosis rate is way higher than full. That's your growth. Year 1, 10% of patients you think can be diagnosed. Year 2, maybe you can get it to 20, 30, then ultimately something higher. And then the bigger that patient pool gets, the more it drives your revenue. And that's the key. And that's where pharmaceutical companies can really play a role, because we'll try to educate physicians, healthcare providers, patients. That's why those ads are on TV. People can recognize, maybe I have that. I'll ask my doctor. Or the healthcare providers going to medical education ceremonies, like, I can recognize that patient. So you diagnose more patients. And in the end, the healthcare provider's happy because they're sort of solving a need for the patient that they weren't able to before. Patients happy because they never knew that they had this disease and that there was a treatment. And ultimately Pfizer benefits too. So that answer your question?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
The next slide is from kitchen is what you saw on the slide, right? And this is for any industry, right? What do you do manage, which customers to prioritize? So go ahead, Kitchen.
So thank you for giving us this opportunity. And my name is Ke Ding. And my question for today is, when Pfizer developed the COVID vaccine, the demand was huge because everyone wants a vaccine at that time. So my question is, how did Pfizer choose to what country to deliver first, and what can other industry learn from it?
Yeah, I think the answer is a little more simple in this particular case of COVID, because you had a few things working. You had a super cold, it required super cold freezers. Those freezers in the beginning weren't everywhere in the world until we tried to help fix some of that. So then when you're looking about availability and short supply, who can get an emergency use authorization? Which countries can do that faster? So you don't just make a drug and then ship it somewhere and they use it. Each country has an authority that reviews it. They have their own process, and it's usually, in some countries it's several years. Well, now we wanted to do it very quickly. So countries that were best prepared to get an emergency use authorization quickly are the ones that got the product faster. If you look at the UK, they had a very quick process, so they got product. The United States had a quick process, so they got product. But the goal through that was to increase production. And that was really the miracle of this whole thing. Our colleagues in manufacturing are really heroes, because they didn't know that they weren't sure how much they could produce. And in meetings, you would hear that they could produce 100 million doses. Like, wow, that's amazing from nowhere. And we had a very aspirational CEO working with them who was thinking billions, not millions. And Mike McDermott and his team were so innovative and so creative. Remember I was talking about purpose earlier? They had a purpose. They didn't know if they could do this and manufacture it. So they found a way, and next thing you know, they were getting up 2 billion doses. Last year, delivered 3 billion doses. This year will be 4. So that's how that happened. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Things which are a bit tougher, right?
All right. We can skip right over that. If my daughter's watching, you can sign off.
And deal with the slide. So the pharmaceutical industry is highly profitable, right? Basically, an investment has tripled in value, which is more than the stock market or housing, which doubled. But it's much less than tech, right? Companies like Microsoft or Apple, they grew 7-fold. So when Pfizer decides that they are going to give 2 billion doses to developing countries at cost, you guys have pressure from investors saying, no, you got to make more money. And how do you manage that?
Pressure from investors never goes away, no matter what your product category is. But the key thing here, and the key thing ever since I was associated with Pfizer, a couple things rang true. Number one, the patient is front and center. The patient is first. Number two, Pfizer has always had a commitment to deliver medicines to underserved markets and countries. And when you think about, a global pandemic, if you only solve it in a few countries, then you still have a big problem on your hands. So Pfizer found numerous ways to help get that product to the places that needed to be. We work with the UPS Foundation, and that foundation delivered these sub-zero super cold freezers to certain places. We worked with Zipline, a company that used actually drone service in Ghana to get medicines to remote locations. And then there's Project Last Mile, which is organization getting medicines, that last mile to patients in Africa. So the commitment there was that we would do everything within our power, or Pfizer would do everything. I left them very recently, so it's already good enough. So everything in our power to get this medicine to the patients. And the belief is that if we put the patient first, then ultimately the benefit will come back to us. And that is something that our CEO, Albert Bourla, was adamant about from the day he took over. And it's a belief instilled all of us. So when we talk about new opportunities and products, did you notice I don't think you ever heard me say money. I didn't say these many patients will give us so many dollars. It's just not the way we think, Pfizer, right? It's sort of like, how can we help these patients? If we can find enough of them in need, then ultimately Pfizer, it'll be good for Pfizer, and that's proven to be the case. So we also think that by doing these things and donating these products, it's good for patients, good for Pfizer, it's also good for the investor.
Okay, the next question is.
Did they get easier? Or?
Yeah. No, actually, no, it's going to get very hard now. So the next question is coming from Siduan.
Yeah.
Hello.
Gladstone.
Hello.
My name is Julia, and thank you for the opportunity to ask question. And my question is, since consumers always worry that the pharma is promoting drugs just to make money, yes, and I see Pfizer is going to produce the vaccine for shingles. Yes, and which used to cost more than $450 in China. And according to the CDC, the incidence of shingles is only 0.4%. So on social media platform, people argue that the pharma is promoting this drug just to make money. So do you have any tips on how consumers can balance the information received to make better decisions?
No, thanks for the question. It's a really good one. And I know Pfizer made an announcement with BioNTech that they were going to look at an mRNA shingles vaccine. It's not available now, but the point is a very good one. And I think if the question is how to help consumers balance, it's really, really tough because the stat you produced was like CDC's incidence is point something, 0.4. If you go to CDC's website, which I'm sure you would or did, you see that 1 in 3 patients in their lifetime will actually have shingles. So if a social media platform is taking a snippet, 0.4% seems like nothing, right? So you're like, wow, pharma's just trying to make money out there. Well, the reality is the CDC says 1 in 3 patients will actually get shingles. 10 to 18% of those patients will have something that lasts called PHN, which is basically nerve pain that lasts a very, very long time. So when you think about something like shingles as the example, I think it's such a good one that you brought up because I actually had shingles about less than a year ago. I am over 50. I delayed getting my vaccine. I work for a company, my bad. I learned my lesson there for sure. So I got shingles and the rash didn't show up, but I was in massive pain. So I thought I had hurt my back. So I went to an orthopedic surgeon who also thought I had messed up my back because it was severe pain. He gave me an MRI looking to see if your back is fine. So lo and behold, the rash shows up, realized that it's shingles. And it is excruciating pain. And all I could think about during that time is how dumb I was. That crosses my mind every time. Why didn't I get the vaccine? I was worried about being part of that 10 to 18% because I couldn't understand that pain were to last a long time. What kind of quality? You couldn't sleep. Like what was the quality of my life be? So I think the challenge for consumers is to sort out the 4% on social media from the reality of the 1 in 3. And that's another area where pharmaceutical marketing, what we're talking about here, can really, really play a big role because our goal is to educate on the facts. And if we would be doing a better job of educating 1 in 3 as an industry, I mean, Pfizer's not doing this, but about the 1 in 3, then people would understand, oh, so among the 3 of us, which one of us 3 are going to get shingles? That would be me, since I didn't get the shot. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
All right,
Thank you very much. The next question, and you did in Europe, so you have also the ability to share a bit on that.
Hello.
Thank you for asking all the questions today.
Thank you.
My name is Omkar Judge, and my question is that Enbrel costs about 80,000 per year, versus Switzerland, where it costs about 7,200 per year. Where Switzerland is a richer country, and people over there paid high salaries. We learned in class about local, national, and global prices, but we couldn't figure out pharma. So why are prices in the US so much more higher? And are there any best practices that you learned when you worked in Europe?
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. It's absolutely a great one. So when you look at list prices, particularly in the US for pharmaceuticals, it's extraordinarily deceiving. So if you look at the price you mentioned, the $80,000. Well, that's not the actual, I'm going to not talk about Enbrel specifically, so I'll create a hypothetical here. Many of these high cost products or higher cost products, call it 80,000. Again, we're not talking Enbrel, but just in general, right? In order to get that to the patient, that product is ultimately discounted multiple times through rebates, through middleman, through payers. Some of those discounts range as large as 50, 60, 70% in some categories. So the 80,000 doesn't represent the price that insurers or societies pay. So now you're left with a much lower number. But to your point, it's still higher than Switzerland. I don't care how you do the math, it's still higher than Switzerland. And what companies do is they ask themselves, first of all, every country has a different system and way of evaluating the value of pharmaceuticals. So in this case, Switzerland has a certain way. We do all the things we talked about earlier. Disease state value in Switzerland says it's worth 7,200 or whatever figure you said. You're left with a decision as a drug company. Do I deny those patients in Switzerland my medicine? If I give it to them at 7,200, it's not what you want to do. Can you do that? Most companies probably supply the medicine. And that's why you wind up having, that sort of disparity across the board. It is not a perfect system in any country, including the US. But it's important to note that when you think about drug costs in the US, it's oftentimes less than it is than people would think. So it's about 14% of all healthcare system costs. And it has been growing at a rate for 7 out of the last 10 years, growing at a rate slower than all of healthcare. For the next 10 years, it's projected to grow at about the same rate as healthcare. So it's not the biggest part of the expense, but it's the biggest part of the expense that drives savings throughout the whole industry. And the good news is the US is amongst the first countries to get innovation. We support innovation here through a number of means. And if you look at new medicines, we'll get those new medicines faster with more access than many, many other countries. And for fun, if you want to Google and look around, you'll find in many cases, response rates, use cancer as an example. And as a result of some of these treatments, your survival rates and whatnot are higher in the US than some other developed countries who maybe have different processes as well. Because some of these countries that come up with these prices that we have to decide to go along with, sometimes it takes years, very long time. So thanks for the question. Not an easy one, tough one.
Going to get even harder.
Oh,
There
okay.
is a photo up of the red light deal. So.
We can skip the tough one if you can.
It's the last tough one, but no, we will let you.
Very silent.
Yeah, to stress.
Is the silence the tough part?
Exactly, yes. There we
There we
go.
go.
Ms. Divyat Shah, thank you for giving us this opportunity, Mr. Gladstone. I would like to ask you one question. My question is that 27 million people in the United States don't have health insurance. What can the pharma industry do so that they don't have to pay list prices?
Thanks for the question. The pharma industry can do a lot. First of all, most companies have what we call patient assistance programs. These are compassionate use medicines for patients that don't have insurance or they don't have low income or employment. Most companies have those sort of programs available. In addition to that, you've got coupons, things to help them afford medicines. But also use the example that was used about the medicine that cost $80,000. Many cases that only costs the patient $10 a month because of insurance, everything like that. So companies can help by providing use for those patients compassionate use for those patients who can't afford it, coupons and discount to bring their out-of-pocket cost very low. There's a lot more that pharmaceutical companies can do. We have a product category called biosimilars. So when you take your normal pill, your Eliquis, it's a small molecule, it's in a pill, you swallow it. Biologicals or biologic medicines or vaccines, and you usually inject those. Well, you can't really have a generic to those because you can't find something identical, exactly the same. It's a biological. So you have something that's similar. They call those biosimilars. It's essentially like generic competition for large molecule, sort of biologic medicines. And we can go a long way toward increasing the utilization of those biologic medicines. So when you have a pill, small molecule, when that goes generic, that's a gift to society. The price goes down to nothing. A million people manufacture it. It's healthy, it's good, it's fine, it's our industry. But with these biologic medicines, there's some hesitancy to use biosimilars because it's not the same. So what we can do is educate healthcare providers that these are safe and medicines that could be used. They're going to be way cheaper in many cases than the brand medicine. But consumers also have to understand, hold on a minute, this is not the same thing. Wait a minute, it's not like switching out to generic. They need to understand that it's safe. At the same time, payers need to understand that they need to reimburse and pay for these medicines. So we engage in the industry significant lobbying to try to have some government actions to enable the use of biosimilars in a more effective way. So that's something we are doing and can do to drive patient costs down as well. There are other things. Right now, when we contract, we work with a big entity, a payer of some sort, and we agree to sell it at a certain price based on the competitive scenario or whatever they're demanding. We're moving toward, slowly, but we'll get there, to value-based pricing in the United States, where you can talk to a payer and say, this pill is going to add this amount of value. It's going to reduce your cost by $10 million, therefore we can charge you $1 million to serve all these patients. So we're moving to something a bit more value-based. So those are a few things we can do, but it's not going to be done by one company, one industry. It needs to be a collaboration so that the healthcare providers, the consumers, the payers, and government are all aligned in ways to help drive some of these down.
So the value base is more the European system.
Pardon me?
That is more like the European system, right?
A little
Europeans
closer,
yeah.
a little closer, but the European isn't necessarily value-based. It's similar. Yeah, I'll just,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It's similar enough. Yeah.
Super. Well, thanks very much. That was the end of all the hard questions, but you're building a bridge for the question from Patricia. Yeah.
So that's a setup. That means if I blow the easy question.
Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you.
My question is, last year Pfizer spent $2 billion on advertising and pledged to provide $1 billion of COVID-19 vaccine to at a not for profit price. How can some of those advertising resources be used to convince those who are hesitant to get their vaccination or annual boosters? And how do you think that for those of us who are taking our masters in marketing, should we apply to a pharmaceutical company?
Absolutely. Thanks for those questions. First of all, the vaccine is under an emergency use authorization, which limits the way you can do marketing and traditional advertising. So that's why you're seeing a bit of a different approach there. And Pfizer's approach to vaccine hesitancy is through the science, through the science to understand real world data so people can understand the safety and efficacy. But for the rest of our portfolio that has a full approval, you can advertise and put full efforts behind. And I can tell you that pharmaceutical marketing is one of the, I am biased, one of the best places to do marketing on planet Earth because it's so engaging. And there's nothing wrong with selling screws or soda, right? That's super challenging and stuff. The things that make pharmaceutical marketing different is, would be the fact that number one, it's purpose driven, right? I mean, when you think about the things that you can do to impact patients' lives, I'll give you an example. When a patient has AFib, atrial fibrillation, they can oftentimes have a stroke because the blood clot can form and it goes straight to the brain. Matter of fact, many people find out they have AFib by having a stroke first. So if you're a marketing person for that brand and you figure out diagnosis rates are low because my dad has AFib. The only reason he found out is he was having a knee surgery. He might have been one that had a stroke, but he was just lucky. So as a marketing person, what can we do? What is everybody wearing around their wrists, right? We can partner with companies like, Fitbit and those that can monitor arrhythmias like that and get back to the doctor. What if you were the person that helped come up with that idea or execute it? And millions of people have AFib that are undiagnosed. What if that meant hundreds of thousands of people get diagnosed? I wonder how many lives you would save. That's a pretty fulfilling proposition. That's just one example. We've got loads of them. So that's the fulfilling, purposeful part. When we get out of bed, that's what I think about. I used to make stadiums full demonstrations of people that have been helped and what the dinner tables would look like if our medicines would be there with an empty seat, those sort of things. But also, it's fun because you're engaging with world thought leaders in medicine in different areas. So in marketing, pharmaceuticals, it starts way back in the lab. And some of our clinicians are the best marketing positioners you'll ever find. That's weird. That was new to me. They weren't trained in this stuff. But if you're making a medicine and you're in the early stages and going to put it into people, you kind of have to think, who is this for and how's it going to be used? So our people are now working with our clinical development team on the early stages to make sure that clinical trials are made in such a way that it benefits patients and we can communicate it in such a way. So I've dealt in during my early marketing days, you're at the table with world-leading cardiologists and you're having a discussion, learning from them. And then you take that knowledge, you go apply it and figure out how to impact patients. I think it's the greatest thing in the whole world, but I might be a little biased. Can I answer your question?
Yes, but you
missed one question.
Uh-oh.
For those of us doing marketing, do you think we should apply to a pharmaceutical company?
Absolutely, 100%.
Okay.
Times 10, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then let's continue with career questions. I think Eva, you asked on behalf of Cecilia. No, Cecilia, perfect. You're here. Well, great. Yeah. Yeah. Now, so that you guys know, once I was in your shoes, right? Once I was an international student, and back then Procter and Gamble did hire international students. Go ahead, Cecilia.
Okay. It's a good. Victoria, my question today is how do global companies benefit from hiring international students?
Next question. Thank you for the question. That's great. I think the first thing to think about is my previous role, 58 countries, only one of them was the US. So first and foremost, looking at international students, hugely important. And I think if I'm a company, I'm looking for international students for a couple of reasons. We oftentimes have US marketers who grew up in the US and they know the US very well, and then they grow on to become global marketers. That's really tough if you've never lived or been in another country to sort of figure out and understand what's happening there. An international student comes in with a big advantage because you've got a perspective that is not like this, it's like this. And so companies are looking for you. You're in hot demand, international students. I lived overseas for 6 years, a couple of different countries, and there were some of the really developmental times. And the one thing I would say is, as an international student coming in, try to be balanced, because in a lot of these big companies, you have a lot of US focused people who don't have international experience. Make sure you're not only an international student, but you get international experience and US experience, because pretty soon you become a unicorn. Like during my career, a lot of people, when I went overseas, I didn't know what I was doing. It was a challenge. Came back, I knew a lot more stuff. So then when I was competing for higher level positions, I was competing against people who only had US experience. And it became a bit easier to acquire those sort of positions. So yes, you're needed, love it, go for it, have a ball. Companies need international marketing students and students in general like crazy. So thanks.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Mr. Gladstone. My
Hello.
name is Benaroya. And following up, so firstly, thank you so much for giving us this opportunity.
Thank you.
And following up, I would like to ask, what is the most important quality that you see in employees? And should female employees, like students like me, to apply for Pfizer?
Yeah, integrity and excellence. Integrity, excellence, and attitude are the three things that I look for more than anything. If you have excellence and no integrity, I have no time for you, right? If you have a great attitude and no excellence, kind of the same thing, only it's harder to say. So you need all three of these things. This is what we're looking for. And I think now is a perfect time for women in particular to join pharmaceutical companies in general, because there's a need, particularly at the senior levels, for more women in pharma at a higher level. And pharmaceutical companies are advancing women at a higher rate. Companies like Pfizer had a goal to get to a certain level of VPs in the company. So female key talent, that's the key thing. Key talent, killing it, doing great, are going to be accelerated not only in Pfizer, which they are, but in other companies. And I can tell you Pfizer has a specific program called Women Inspiring Women, one of many programs, which is where women who are a little higher in the organization, women who are a little lower in the organization, very frequently and share ideas and thoughts. And just some of the simple things, like all the research shows that women will not typically apply to a role unless they've met all the qualifications. The man sitting right next to him will apply if he has half of those qualifications. That's not like a stare, that's an actual true thing. So when I work with women in an organization, I'm like, when you're looking at a job description, don't worry about the 5 things you don't have, worry about the 5 things you do. And there are some differences like that are really important for, I think, women to keep in mind. Also, the research will show that women are less likely to raise their hand to do those things. So we had an initiative called Raise Your Hand, just to remind people to get up there and get after it. So now's a great time to do it. Companies are super interested because diverse workforces, diverse thoughts make for much better work environments, but much better business outcomes too. I don't want to run too far, but I have another. Do you have time for a quick one?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a drug that was for diabetic peripheral neuropathy. This is about diversity in general, not necessarily about women. Drug's been launched for years. We had a colleague who figured out that African Americans suffered from peripheral pain, from nerve pain, and they were being diagnosed at a much lower rate. So we came up with a plan to reach those patients. We hired Cedric the Entertainer to do public service, and we saw diagnosis rates go through the roof. So we were all celebrating. We were like super happy that this had happened because it's great for these patients, great for society. Pfizer did really well in this. And one of the colleagues in the group said, yeah, this is great. But imagine if we would have had a diverse team a few years ago and we would have done this at launch. I wonder how many patients we missed. I think it's a brilliant example of why diverse teams make such a difference. So thank you.
Thanks.
Encouraging women to work.
Great.
Yeah, and one of my classmates would like to know more detailed about your career, but she cannot come today.
Okay.
So, what was the most significant challenge during career at Pfizer, and most importantly, any career advice for us?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for the question. So I'll talk about a challenge and then a crisis, because I think they're two different things. So challenge, one of the biggest challenges I had was going overseas to work from the US. Grew up in the US, went on vacation overseas, but didn't live in it. So I started out in the Nordics before I went to all of Europe and Asia, and I read 14 books on culture before I went to Sweden, which is where I was going to live. So, and it sort of just to confuse me further. But so the biggest challenge was operating in a completely different culture. Even though they speak English really well, it's sort of puts you to sleep because you think it's the same culture. And learning to work with different groups, and also learning to have somebody tell you the truth. So Magnus Wassian was a guy that I said, your job is to tell me when I am doing wrong. Like, I'm not going to get all the cultural mistakes that I'll make, but you've got to tell me. So that was super important. He'd be like, you did this. And I'm like, I don't get it. He goes, that gives a bad impression. But I don't know. My US brain didn't know that. So that was a big challenge, and I loved it, man. I'm a culture junkie. I love going to different places and communicating in a way that resonates with that audience, which is different than a way than when you're in the UK versus Japan. Two different ways to communicate. Love it, love it, love it. So when it comes to other challenges like crisis, I can probably walk you through an example, but I think the way I would probably think about managing crisis is this. They're going to happen, and typically what happens is when a crisis occurs, people panic. This can be a competitive situation that creates a disaster. People are worried in marketing teams, oh my gosh, am I going to have a job? If you're a sales rep, oh my gosh, there are 3,000 sales reps that could be affected by this thing that just happened, and people get into panic mode. And then they start working and they start talking and they become super unproductive. So the first thing I would say, whether you're an individual colleague or whether you're a leader in a crisis, is step back for a moment. And I learned this trick from, I was kind of doing it before, but it solidified it. A friend of mine, Michael Hayes, he was a Navy SEAL commander. He's a White House fellow. He's a true American hero. And what he learned in the Navy SEALs was when something happens, the first decision you have to make is when to make a decision. Right? I see a lot of heads turning. I got to think about that for a moment. So when a crisis hits, we immediately spring into action. Step back. I do this all the time. Okay, wait a minute. When do we have to make a decision here? And you have to chart in your mind and actually spend some time thinking about time to make a decision gives you more information. So you're going to make a better decision. But there's a point in time when wasting time costs you more money. So you have to find the cross point between the incremental value of waiting versus the cost that waiting is going to give you. And then when you know that intersection, you know when you have to make a decision. So you say, okay, I've got 3 weeks to make a decision. That informs everything else you do. You say, okay, here's information I need to find out in order to make a great decision. And you can put a timeline on it and do that and make great decisions. So that is first and foremost, because that takes the pressure off of everybody. Instead of running around like circles, it's like, okay, we've got 2 weeks. We've got 4 hours. Make the decision then. The second thing is whether you're an individual contributor or a leader, when crisis happens, that can mean 1,000 things to different businesses, from the Tylenol issue to everything. So when it hits, number one, you've got to eliminate the stress for people. When people get worked up, nervous, concerned about themselves, their future, the business, everything tightens up. You feel it in your stomach, right? I can almost feel it as I sit here. You have to, I'm working myself up into a friend. So you've got to relieve that tension ASAP. I tend to do it with humor. And if you're an individual, you don't have to be the leader to do it. You can still take things very seriously. And I'll explain to people sometimes who are wondering why we're laughing in the face of this mess. You lose your creativity when you're under stress. You do not have the ability to innovate. You do not think out of the box and come up with wild solutions, because that comes from having fun and thinking, well, okay, this is a disaster. Let's figure this out. So you've got to relieve the stress for your peers, or if you're the leader, you've got to do it for the team. And it's okay to explain to people, it's okay if we, sort of laugh and have some fun here. I have seen teams spiral into no man's land when crisis occurred because they couldn't get out of the spiral. Because it's hard. Life is hard. Challenges, crises are no fun. So that's probably the key thing to think about when it comes to, challenges. And yeah, so thank you for the question.
Thanks very much. So I would like to thank everyone at NYU. I'll do this. That would be very met in the beginning. Patrick and Phil on the back. And then we get something that both Cecilia and Eva were the editors, but that all the students participated on. And so probably was joke around. Yes.
You've joined a live Finance for Marketing Decisions class at NYU School of Professional Studies. In our class, we select a Fortune 500 company to learn about finance by making decisions on pricing, headcount, marketing, and profitability. CFOs and CMOs from Disney, Coca-Cola, and McDonald's have joined us to respond to questions from the audience. All speaker sessions are free and open to everyone. And today, over 50 students got together to say,
Gladstone 先生，感謝你這屆分享對學生來講是一個真好嘅機會。
我哋好榮幸可有今次嘅機會 ，Mr. Gladstone。
when we were doing the assignments,
Nous sommes reconnaissants d'avoir cette chance, Monsieur Gladstone.
On behalf of all students from New York,
to North Carolina,
and Europe to Asia.
謝謝格蘭斯頓先生，謝謝格蘭斯頓先生，
謝謝格萊斯頓先生。
ขอบคุณค่ะคุณ Gladstone。
धन्यवाद Mr. Gladstone，謝謝格蘭斯頓先生。